Hello again, and welcome to Media War Stories, behind-the-scenes tales from the front lines of the media. I am your host, Tom Curley. How are you all today? I shouldn't have to explain this in that it's our 41st show, but we talk with old friends about all the crazy stuff that happened to us when we were on the job, in the media. My stories are mostly behind the cameras, and this guy's stories were mostly in front of the cameras. Veteran broadcaster from Boston, Mr. Garry Armstrong. Garry, how the hell are you today?
Doing well. I've got a couple of layers of clothing on because it is that time of year. Um, you were talking, I have to explain this to our viewers. Hopefully, they will appreciate it. As you were setting us up to go, you had some audio problems, and I think it's with wires crumbling or crossing, and you were having difficulty getting that solved. But as I listened to it, and I heard you talking, and you were not using good words to describe your scenario, but it was interesting because I heard all of this crumbling and you talking, and I must tell you, it's the same sound that I get when I go in for audiology tests to see how I'm doing with my cochleas. So it was interesting, and it was a reminder of how difficult it is to hear more than one thing at a time.
Yeah, and also how annoying it is when you can't figure out which wire. Of course, if you looked at the Rube Goldberg of how I get the output of this microphone into the camera, um, you'd probably understand why. And for you kiddies out there who have never heard of Rube Goldberg, Google it. He was a very famous guy. So,
he's a,
this
he's
week,
a he's a candidate. He's a Republican candidate, isn't he, for a president?
yeah, wouldn't surprise me at all. So this week, I've got a story that I'm anxious to tell, and it's true. And I'm sure that
Okay.
I've told it before, and people won't believe it. And I know you've got one. So
I think you should lead off. I think you should lead off because your story has depth to it, and it's really funny.
depth. All right. Okay. This is a true story. This actually happened. Um, when I was a freshman at Hofstra University, um, it was in 1970. It would have been in the second semester of, no, the first semester of 1970. My second semester, I was the chief announcer for WVHE, for the radio station. And one day, uh, down the stairs into the little theater came a guy named Admiral Miller, Min Miller. He was he was a vice president of the university. He was a very important guy, and
Okay.
I happened to know him because I had met him before. He was a no nonsense guy, and he was very agitated. And he came downstairs, and he's looking around, and I said, "Hi, can I help you?" And he went, "I need an announcer." And I went, "Okay, I'm the chief announcer. Can I help you?" And he goes, "Do you own a suit?" And I went, "Yeah." He said, "Fine." And he handed me a piece of paper, and he said, "Be at the university club in 45 minutes." I went, and then he left in a hurry. And so I went back to my dorm. I put on my suit, and 45 minutes later, I found myself sitting at the university club at a dais in front of about 150 to 200 people. Sitting next to me is a prominent surgeon. On the other side is the dean of students. Next to him is the president of the university, Clifford Lord, and a bunch of other
Wow.
dignitaries, and me. And they're
Wow.
feeding me. They're feeding me filet mignon and lobster, and they're feeding me wine. And I got to tell you, I'm eating this. I'm
Oh
going,
my
wow,
word.
this is this is better than what I get in the cafeteria. And so now the question you have to ask is, why was I there? Well, it turns
Tom,
out,
why were you there?
funny you should ask. So the piece of paper that he gave me was a paragraph, and it was hastily written, and it was something like, on behalf of the student body, I would like, I, as head of the student council, would like to thank you all for helping build the North Campus Infirmary. So what I found out, and the word the words as president of the student council were scratched out. So it turns out that this was a dinner to celebrate the opening of an infirmary that they had just recently opened on the North Campus
Okay.
for the dormitories. All right. Back then, there was only four
Okay.
dormitories, four towers, A, B, C, and D.
Right.
And I remember once earlier on, I had cut myself with a scalpel in my dorm dissecting a shark, and I spent a couple of hours wandering South Campus trying to find the infirmary. And when I finally did find it,
Right.
it was healed. So all she did was put a Band-Aid on it. So this was nice. So now you have to ask, why am I there? Okay. The president of the student council was the one that was supposed to be there, because this dinner was to
Right.
thank all the donors, the whole audience, or all these rich people who had donated money for this endeavor. Well, about
Right.
2 hours or maybe less before this event, Admiral Miller discovered that the president of the student council was not on campus. Okay? He was nowhere to be found. It turns out that he was upstate in the Adirondacks experimenting with a lot of chemical compounds that Dr. Timothy Leary used to promote all the time. So they find out that the president of the student council is basically upstate tripping his brains out, and they got nobody to thank these donors. So Admiral Miller, in his, sort of spot, he's like, I need a student who can read. The radio station has announcers. They announce. Okay, so he ran down to the radio station, and he was literally going to grab the first kid that he could find. So I find this out. So I'm sitting there going, and I'm still, this hasn't really sunk in yet. This is still rich. So the president, Clifford Lord, he gets up and he starts and he says, welcome all of you. We're here today to celebrate the opening of the, whatever they called it, infirmary, here to help our students who live in the dormitories. Oh, excuse me, residence halls. And everybody laughed. Now, I'm going like, I don't get the joke. All right. And he goes
Right,
on and on.
right.
And then the next up is Dean Sal Luiso. And I too, representing the students, we are so happy that the dormitories, residence halls, he gets a bigger laugh. Okay. I'm still going, I don't get the joke. So every person on the dais gets up and they give their speech. And I'm the last one. And each one says the word dormitories accidentally and then corrects himself and says residence halls, and the laugh gets a little bigger. So I'm the last one, and I get up, right? And I look at this speech, which was just insanely lame, and I realize I can't read this. So
Yeah.
I start to ad lib. I start to riff. All right. And I go, well, as a member, as a student who actually lives in the dormitories, residence halls, huge laugh. Okay. And I go like, and I go on to tell the story about the night that I cut myself with a scalpel dissecting a shark and wandered around. And then I finish it going, so it's really nice to know that if I ever do that again, I won't have to leave or go so far from my dormitory. Residence halls. Practically get a standing ovation. So now it's over with. Everybody's happy, right? The president of the university invites me for drinks. So now I'm in the
Oh
university
my.
club and I'm having drinks with the vice president, the president, the dean, a few other people. And I'm still like, what the? I'm 19 years old, right?
Right.
And here's the whole point of the story. Clifford Lord, the president, then explained to me the history of Hofstra University. How did Hofstra
Okay.
University become Hofstra University? Now, this is what he told me, okay? I'm not saying that it's true. He could have been pulling my leg. I don't see why he would have. All right, so
I
here it
don't
is.
think he was the type.
Hofstra University.
Yeah.
No, he wasn't. So Hofstra University was originally owned by a guy named Willie Hofstra. And he owned all the land. It was a farm, okay? And he had a wife named Katie Hofstra. Now, there used to be a house on the south campus of Hofstra University. I think it was called Hofstra House. You probably remember it.
Right.
It wasn't a building, it was a
Yes,
house.
I do.
And I'm not sure, they did some administrative stuff in there. Well, that was the original house that Willie and Kate Hofstra lived in. All right. So when Willie Hofstra died, he left his entire estate to his wife, Katie Hofstra. When Katie Hofstra died, she left the entire estate to her 27 cats. on the condition and that as long as they were taken care of in perpetuity and their descendants, the land, the estate could be used for some community project.
So let me stop you for a moment. So Hofstra College now University goes back to a cat house?
Well,
Is that what you're
we're
saying?
getting there. No, we're getting there. So New York University originally acquired it, and then it broke off and became Hofstra College, okay? And then in the late 60s, it became Hofstra University. And for a long time, there was a person who took care of Katie Hofstra's cats. Now, over the years, that person either died, and they didn't really take care of the cats anymore. But I don't know if you noticed it, and I don't know if it's true to this day. But back then, when we were going to school, if you noticed on South Campus, there were a lot of cats, feral cats, lots of
Yes,
them,
I remember that.
all over the.
Yes.
You remember that? Well, they are the descendants of Katie Hofstra's cats, and the plant department used to feed them. They always put out food for them
Right.
because it was a tradition, or they knew the story. The cats were very friendly, and there was a lot of them. I would assume that they're probably there to this day. So now we fast forward to my senior year when I did a show called Fulton's Folly. All right. And everybody thought that Fulton's Folly referred to a steamship. And we did an opening theme song, which I am going to play for you. Okay. And everybody thought that the words were about a steamship, or they never really knew. But the theme song is actually about Hofstra University. And I just want you to listen to it,
Okay.
and then I will explain on the other side.
Right.
And now, WVHC presents
When I was a lad, I ran rough and mad over mountain and desert and shore, until one day I found my way to Katie's cat house door. Your credit is good at Katie's cat house. Your credit is good at the door. Your credit is good at Katie's cat house. Next year it'll cost $5 more. At Katie's Cat House, pleasure's your guide, and you might even learn something too. But remember, my lad, things might turn out bad, 'cause Katie is best at the screw. Your credit is good at Katie's Cat House. Your credit is good at the door. Your credit is good at Katie's Cat House. Next year it'll cost $5 more. Next year it'll cost $5 more.
Now, the song was called "The Ballad of Katie's Cat House." It was all about Hofstra University. Fulton's Folly was named that not for a steamship. It was named it because Hofstra is on Fulton Avenue in Hempstead. All right. Katie's Cat House. The line about your credit is good, next year it'll cost $5 more, is because every year the price of a credit to take a class went up by $5. And the lines about, at Katie's Cat House, pleasure's your guide, and you might even learn something too, which is that basically college was all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and eventually you went to class, and sometimes you might actually learn something. So the whole song was just a goof on Hofstra University and a tribute to that evening when the president, Clifford Lord, told me the history of Hofstra University. And I never told anybody that. We never told anybody that because, I don't think they would have appreciated it. But it was all a big goof. So that's a story. Actually happened. Don't care whether you believe it or not. But very funny.
Funny. Now, did you think, you mentioned in telling your story, did you think this was just a goof, that somebody was coming after you? Because you were just a freshman, as you said, and I don't know whether or not the legend of Tom Curley had spread that quickly. Did you really believe that this was a legitimate dinner, etc.?
Oh, no. Absolutely. I mean, I knew who the guy was. I knew who he was, and he was obviously serious. Right. But what was fascinating is, right. a little factoid. At the time, what was also unusual about that is that students weren't allowed in the university club. It was only for faculty, administration, and invited guests. And at the time, It was a bone of contention with the students. A matter of fact, during the Kent State Massacre, when all the student riots happened, Hofstra had 2 weeks of rioting. And one of the things they did is they took over the university club. And it was really funny because they all got in there and then they looked around and they went, this place isn't really that interesting. It's just another building. And so they all left, So it was just that, go to the university club and, wow, they let me in. And then, it was just all of a sudden, they walked me in. Hi, thanks for coming. Sit down here. And I only found out what was going on sitting on the dais. I think it was the doctor next to me who explained, why I was there and why he was there. And he was a really nice guy. Matter of fact, he was with drinks afterward. He actually he wrote me a recommendation that actually got me an interview for medical school at Albany Medical School.
Oh, that's cool.
4 years later. Yes. And he said, because he knew I was pre-med at the time. And he said, when you graduate, give me a call. I'll send you a letter of recommendation. And he did. So weird things. So anyway, what do you got?
Well, before we get to what I have, and this is really a hard act to follow, you son of a gun. What was the reaction, if any, back down at the radio station? And I'm wondering especially, how did Mr. Jeffrey C. Krause react to that?
He thought it was funny as hell. He actually, he was beyond amused. I think his reaction was first is you got to be kidding me, and I think the other one was thank God they grabbed you and not the kid who happened to be on the air who could literally barely read. So, no, everybody thought it was funny. And also,
Oh,
what's it like on
I
the inside of the
oh, yeah,
university club?
and, long delayed applause for you that you pulled it off. I mean, that for a freshman, in that circle, that's amazing. So, 53 years later, we applaud you. You survived. You mentioned, I wanna talk a little bit, if we have time, later on. You mentioned, student demos, in your conversation. It brings to mind, I'm trying to channel this back to the 1980s because, Ronald Reagan was president, and, I think it was the middle 1980s because re-election time was coming around, and one of the candidates seeking office was, Pat Buchanan, if you remember him. He was a far right wing type person. He was a gun nut, and I got to interview him. I wasn't really excited about it, but that's besides the point. So as we're sitting down, he could hear. I don't know how he could, but he was lamenting how far the country had fallen because of all of these students who didn't respect the flag. They didn't respect the legacy of our country, and he started even before we got into the interview. He started with lock and load, bro. Lock and load, bro. And I stopped for a moment and I said, what do you mean? He said, well, that's the mantra of this country for real Americans, lock and load. And he said, those young kids out there on the lines, they've never worked for their jobs. They've never worked for their country. They've never served their country. The words they're spewing, they're just empty. Those words don't mean anything. Those words are nonsense. And I said, really? And he said, yes. And, I know you're not one of them. You're one of the good ones. And I said, what do you mean, one of the good ones? And I didn't push that too far. And I said, about words. And he said, well, yes, bro. And I said, bro. And he just smiled and he held up his rifle. And I said, someone once said, in regards to your verbiage about words, someone once said, Mister, words are what men live by. Words are how our country was built. Words to tell you what a man is like. So don't tell me what words are like. You have a lot of learning to do about words. And I looked at him and he said, who the hell said that? Some lefty? I said, no, that was John Wayne. And he just sat back and said, what? I said, yes, John Wayne said that. And he said, well, I don't think the Duke knew what he was saying. I said, would you like to have this piece of tape repeated and sent to Duke Wayne? And he said, no, 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 let's not rush into this. And I said, okay. You know what? Let's pause for a moment and think about what you have said. Lock and load, bro. We'll be back after this. And we cut the interview and he walked out. I could clearly hear him
Wow.
saying, that damn boy, he's not one of them. He's one of those liberal Eastern effete elitist. And I yelled back at him, so you're a Spiro Agnew fan? And he turned around and he gave me his middle finger as he waddled out. It's interesting the way they played around with the student demonstrations and the legacy of the student demonstrations, and they had no sense of how much of the country the students really represented at that point. And you were in the middle of some of those, either participating or covering
Yeah.
them, weren't you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, we don't have time. I think we might have discussed this in a previous show, but I'm pretty sure that we have. So in a future weeks, the 2 weeks that Hofstra went on strike was memorable, and it was in that 2 weeks that I learned journalism. We were down in the radio station in the trenches for 24 hours a day for 2 weeks, cranking out stories, and that's when I learned what journalism real is, what reporting really is, what checking your sources. I was down. I went down to the protest. I was on the base of the Capitol steps with a press pass, standing behind Country Joe and the
Right.
Fish, looking out at a sea of people, 400,000 people, and they were doing the fish cheer. I don't know if y'all remember Country Joe and the Fish. It was, give me an F,
Yes.
F, give me an I. What's that spell? Fish.
Right.
Except they didn't spell fish. Give me an F, F, give me a U, U, give me a C, C, give me a K, K. What's that spell? 400,000 people going, fuck, what's that spell? Fuck. And I said, wow, this is a moment in history.
Yes, that's when
Yeah,
demonstrations were really demonstrations.
they were really,
Before I forget, I do just checking my email before we sat down to do the show, and someone sent me a reminder about a show that's on HBO, and it's about the Charles Stewart murder case. Uh, I'm going to hold the whole backstory to this because I have to check some facts, but it involved uh, a man who killed his wife. Someone else got the blame, and it exploded into a controversial story that was misunderstood by the media, misunderstood by lawyers. It backflamed, which is not a word, but it hurt Michael Dukakis, who was then running for president. But I want to save that for another show. But that's just a reminder for people who may want to get a jump on this and watch the show. Again, it's called the Charles Stewart Murder Case, and it's on HBO. What I wanted to throw out at you, and we will fill this in with more next week, is you know how we kid reporters about the lame questions. Last night, Owen, Marilyn's son, my stepson, was talking about the stuff that was on television and how often what people say don't really mean anything. And I'm sort of doubling back on what we were just talking about in terms of words. But I was thinking about, those overripe cliches. We see and hear them right now with the mass murders that unfortunately have engulfed the country. And someone will say, well, how could that guy do what he did? And someone invariably from the street where the suspect lived will say, I don't understand. He was such a nice, quiet kid. And then
yeah,
we'll
they
go back
always
to
do
the
that.
reporter on the scene, and he will intone, biting his bottom lip and shaking his head and look back at the town and say, one thing is for sure as they deal with this tragedy, this town will never be the same again. Boom, 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 boom. Or he may say, this
Okay.
quiet, picturesque town, which has undergone senseless violence in a Norman Rockwell town. Marilyn was the one who I think said to me when I came home one day after doing a story about a murder or street shooting, and I had used the term senseless violence, and the question was the obvious one: is there sense violence? Is there violence that makes sense? I don't know unless it. You know what? It could be a
That's
murder for
that's
hire
a good
thing.
point.
That would make sense
That's a
because
good
your
point.
money was involved. Yeah.
I've always
Do you
wanted
have some?
I would love to hear that. I same thing. Sitting in the control room, listening to all this stuff thousands and thousands and thousands of times. You just wish once, the neighbor that you're interviewing goes, "Oh yeah, that guy's weird as shit." Done so. He's got serial killer written all over him. I'm surprised you guys haven't caught him before. No, they never
Oh
say
yeah.
that. It's always, oh,
Now,
he seems so nice.
and as we round up our report of whatever it is we're reporting about, one thing is for sure, Tom. Only time will tell.
Yeah, it's only time will tell. I, you know, you know, somebody should write. You're right. Somebody should write the big book of reporter cliches. Like a cliche generator, so that when you're stuck, you just you hit it and it randomly pops up a cliche and you just insert it. Like for instance, what is the ending? What is the last line, or almost the last line of any disaster movie? As the hero looks out at the rubble of the volcano, of the earthquake, of the alien invasion, it's, and now we rebuild.
Now we rebuild.
Like, really, it's too much. What time is it? 34. We should probably stop. We didn't get to your story, and I apologize. Yeah, you're like becoming the Matt Damon of this show. Sorry we didn't have time, but we'll get to your story. We'll get to your story next week because you did bring up some other things. You should remind me that time the Kent State.
I will, but I wanted to make sure you had
that was
time to tell
hilarious.
that full story.
So let's get on to the, let's see how quickly we can get through the plugs. Serendipity Seeking Intelligent Life on Earth. A Fool's Errand if there ever was one. Voicescapes Audio Theater, best in audio comedy and drama. Half-hour radio show. Funny, funny, funny. And, of course, my sister podcast, Get Off My Lawn with Me, where we talk about life, the universe, and whatever the hell I want to talk about. So, Garry, it has been fun. We will see you next week. Until then, toodles.
Okay.